There we go. This morning we're continuing our series, God on Film, and we are going to look at a movie that it is a remake of a movie that has already been made. It is a live-action version of a Disney cartoon, and I'll just tell you, was one of my least favorite Disney cartoons, but based on what I've seen of this trailer, I think I'll actually watch this one. Lori, would you roll that?
We have excellent news. The matchmaker has found you an auspicious match.
It is decided. Come and sit down. It is what is best for our family.
Yes, I will bring honor to us all. Quiet. Composed. Graceful. Disciplined. These are the qualities we see in a good wife. These are the qualities we see in Mulan. It is my duty to fight.
Scott, have you got me now? There we go. All right. So what were we talking about? Mulan, right. Mulan is coming out at some point later this summer, and it tells the story of Mulan, who was purportedly an actual person that lived over 1,000 years ago in rural China. And anyway, and she, in the course of the film, she has to go to war in the place of her father. And at this point, I'm not going to sort of explain exactly how I feel it connects to Scripture, but instead, I'd like for us to turn in our Bibles to John chapter 13. John chapter 13 is a story about Jesus, and it is, I think, one of the just the most beautiful passages when it comes to showing Jesus' loving kindness and his affection for his disciples. So John chapter 13 tells the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Now, immediately before this, Jesus has been preaching about how he came to save the world. And he says, whoever believes in me believes not in me, but in him who sent me. Whoever sees me sees him who sent me. Like, he is declaring himself to be the Son of God, the ambassador of the Lord Most High. He has this sort of gigantic declaration of who he truly is as the one, the divine creator, the Ancient of Days. Like, he cannot state any more boldly how wonderful and amazing and powerful he is at the end of chapter 12. And then in verse 13, in this first verse, the tone of the text completely changes. I mean, just completely changes. In verse 13, in chapter 13, verse 1, it says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Like it says, here he is, he's declaring his greatness. He's declaring his mission. He's showing himself to these people listening in chapter 12. And then in verse 13, John does, which is something that is a very kind of John thing to do, in that he talks about a festival. 9 different times in the book of John, John sort of tells what season it is by talking about a festival. 7 different times in the book of John, it talks about how, but this isn't Jesus' time. So 9 different times he says there's this festival going on. And then 7 different times he says, but this wasn't Jesus' time. That this wasn't the time for Jesus to truly reveal himself. This wasn't the time for these things to come to fruition about Jesus. But in chapter 13, in that very first verse, he says, here's the festival. It's the Passover. And just so you know what time it is, this is the time when Jesus will really be revealed. This is the time when Jesus prepares to leave the world. And it's such a sobering verse. It is such a somber and really just a sad verse. Because we who know how this story is going to go, we know that what happens with the disciples is sad. It's sad. Out of 12 disciples, 1 would absolutely betray him, kill himself over the guilt, the shame. 1 would publicly deny him 3 times. 9 more would abandon him. In his hour of need, they would be gone. Only 1 of these disciples would stay true. And yet, Jesus loved them to the end. This has the makings of a really great country and western song, doesn't it? Right? Some of you who are fans of country and western, you probably remember George Jones. You remember George Jones? That song, He Stopped Loving Her Today. I remember the first time I ever saw that title, I thought, oh, well, she really did something to make him angry that he stopped loving her today. And then you listen to the song, and you get to the end of it, and you're like, what? He's dead. That's why he stopped loving her, because he's dead. That's why he's dressed in the fancy clothes, and they're carrying him. Oh, he's dead. That's the only reason he stopped loving her. She never loved him back. That's it. That's what this is. This is talking about the day that Jesus stopped loving them. It's when he dies. He loved them to the end. And they loved him while it was convenient. Verse 2. Verse 2, it describes what is going to precipitate his demise. Verse 2, it says, during supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So there is some ambiguity in the way this sentence is structured. Depending on your translation may look a little different than my translation because there is some ambiguity. It's not 100% certain exactly when Satan put it into Judas's heart, or if Satan was holding it in his own heart, and what exactly the connection is there. But I think we can say with certainty that Judas and Satan are at this point have already conspired to put Jesus on the cross. And it tells us, I think, something really telling, not just about Judas and about Satan, but about ourselves. And that when the scriptures describe how this conspiracy was put together, that it was through the heart. It's through the heart. And sometimes we will do a bad thing and it'll come from a good place. Right? We'll do a bad thing, it'll come from a good place. This morning I tried to put on a shirt, and I was trying, and I was like, I got a couple of the buttons, and then like I'm still with a couple of the buttons, and I'm trying to pull the buttons together, and they're not meeting, right? And I know what that is. That's quarantine, right? That's quarantine pounds right there. And the buttons just aren't quite lining up, and my wife said, I must have dried that on hot. God bless her. God bless her. I must have dried that on hot. No, that's not, right? That's a bad thing, but it's coming from a good place. Scriptures tell us to guard our hearts. Solomon says, above all else, guard your heart. When David is in desperate need of the Lord, he cries out, create in me a clean heart. See, sometimes we have something good in our hearts and it gets messed up with our clumsy actions. That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that Judas has already given his heart away. He's already let Satan put something into his heart that will lead to the cross. In verse 3, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water in a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. This is Jesus' response. And I love the way that it says this at the beginning. God, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands. And I wonder what that must have felt like for Jesus, right? Knowing that the Father had put all things into his hands. Like, we see later on in the scriptures that Jesus tells the disciples that, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, right? And we understand it at that point because, it's the resurrected Lord saying that, right? And so we can very, very easily understand that all authority in heaven and earth has been given to him. But here, Jesus, it's already clear that God has already placed things in his hands. He is already put in charge of things. And not only that, not only does Jesus have authority, but he knows that at the end of this, he's going to the Lord. Or he's going back to the Father, and that he will be at the right hand of the Father in just a couple of days' time. Right? He knows that. And so he chooses to act in that knowledge. I wonder this about us. I wonder how we look at the authority that's been placed in our hands. I wonder how it is that we consider the things that have been placed in our hands. Right? What responsibilities we have, what opportunities we have. Because let's be real, we all have things in our hands. And I don't just mean the pencil or pen that you're chewing on right now, right? You're not supposed to put things in your mouth. COVID? Okay. Right? Not just that there are physical things in our hands, like I have a chair in my hand right now, but we have responsibilities, we have obligations, we have opportunities, right? I have kids, I have a wife, I have friends, I have coworkers, and each of those is something that God has placed in my hands. Each of you has things that God has placed in your hands. And if you knew that once you left this earth that you were going to God, which means that it's to the point where, what's it going to cost you? Right? What's it going to cost you? What are you risking? What do you have to lose? So it's you've got these things that have been placed in your hands, because let's be clear, if you're a Christian, if you're a believer, by the grace of God, when you leave this place, you go to be with your heavenly Father. That's been established not by your actions, but by his actions. We are recipients of his grace, not of our works. Thank God. Not an amen for that one? Come on. We are recipients of his grace and not of the result of our works. There we go. That's better. And so, we know that we go to be with the Father, no matter what it is that we do here. And so, we're playing with house money. We can't lose. So, the things that have been placed in your hands, what will you do? What will you do with those things? Because I think sometimes we don't want to push the envelope. We don't want to make things weird. We don't want to step outside of what's normal or what's expected. A couple of weeks ago, somebody said, Pastor Chip, I just think you have been the perfect pastor for a pandemic. And I don't know how to take that. Like, I said thank you, and then I've thought about it for days afterwards, like, man, I'm not sure that was a compliment after all. You're the best, you're the perfect pass for the messed up year we're having. Thank you. But it's like, okay, so and I look at, every day I consider this, I look and I say, what opportunities are here? What things has Jesus placed in my hands, and what am I to do with them? What things are under my control? Because I know that I go to the Father. I know that when I leave this place, that I go to my Heavenly Father, and so shouldn't I make the most of the opportunities that are here? And so when Jesus has this, when this is his opportunity here with these disciples, and we know that his time is short, that his opportunity with these disciples is not going to be lasting for much longer, that Jesus chooses to dress like a slave. Because the first thing that it talks about him doing is that he removes his clothing, not all of his clothing, but just his outer garment, right? He removes his outer garment, and in doing this, he is dressing himself like a slave, because he's going to do the work of a slave. He's going to do work that was typically done by slaves in a Jewish household. And not just any slave, let me be clear about this. Not just any slave, but typically Gentile slaves. Because the Jews had slaves, and there were certain activities that Jews were not comfortable having other Jews do. They considered it to be debasing them too much. And so the preference was, and you can find rabbinic literature where the rabbis suggest to Jewish slave owners not to have their fellow Jews wash their feet, but to put that off onto the Gentiles, right? And Jesus says, no. They say, right, their culture, this isn't the Bible, by the way. The Bible doesn't tell us to only have Gentile slaves do that. The Bible doesn't say that. That's what they've made up. And let's be clear, they made it up because they were racist. They were. And Jesus comes along and he says, no, that's not okay. That's not how this world works. Jesus looks at them and he's not like, you're better because of the color of your skin, and you're better because of the, like, he looks at them all and he's like, you're all sinners, you all need grace. And we all agree with that. And Jesus says, I'm going to take on this role of a slave, this role that you would put not even on a Jewish slave, but you'd put on a lower slave than that. And I'm going to wash your feet. Now, I need Morgan and Reagan. Y'all come on up here, guys. Because I want us to understand this in a way that I think sometimes we miss it. Because, obviously our table customs are different than their table customs, and I can't really recreate their table customs here because I don't have a Near Eastern table set up. If you guys wouldn't mind, go ahead and take off your shoes and socks. I don't have a Near Eastern tables, but typically their tables would be very low to the floor, and they would sort of sit on cushions while they ate. And then after the meal, they would, the scriptures say, recline at the table. And so they would kind of lean back, typically on their left elbow, sort of lean back in a sort of reclined position with their feet out from under the table. And then Jesus sees them in that position, and he says, I'm going to wash your feet. And to do that, he would take off his outer garment, mess up his microphone, and then he would take a basin, Now, I'm not going to actually wash your feet, but I wanted you to think that I was going to. Tell me something. How awkward is this? Very. Yeah. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most uncomfortable you've ever been, where are we right now? 7? Is that about right for you too? Yeah. You guys can go ahead and have a seat. Thank you. I don't think we think about it maybe as thoroughly as we ought. Because I think if you've been brought up in the church, you've heard this story a whole bunch of times, and yeah, he washed the disciples' feet. But have you ever thought about how awkward this is? I have, because I've been in that chair, and I've had somebody wash my feet, and I've been knelt before them washing their feet. Now, I'm not going to I have no problem washing their feet, but I'm not going to do it in this setting because that's not the way that Jesus did it. See, some people, they look at this passage and I think they sometimes we miss it. See, I think like it was when I was looking at Reagan, man, he was sweating. And it was like, I could tell it's almost like he wanted to be like, nope, no thank you. But of course, he didn't. He was good. He wanted good volunteers. But there is within us, when you're in this chair, when you're in this position for someone to wash your feet, there is within us a resistance to it. That we say, no, I'm good. My feet are fine. My feet are clean enough, okay? I've been wearing socks. It's good. But we push back against it. And that is exactly what Peter does in verse 6. It's exactly what Peter does. In fact, he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Which is a really polite way of saying, please don't wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, what I am doing, you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. And Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. So he says, I don't want you to wash me, Jesus. I don't want you to. Now, these guys didn't really want me to wash their feet. Probably some of it because there's all of you watching here. That makes it awkward. That it would also involve me touching their feet, which is awkward. Maybe it's because they, don't want to see me down here on my hands and knees doing that in front of everybody. I don't know why, but we don't want that. Peter didn't want that. Peter's reasons, I think, are a little more clear because there were social norms about who should wash feet. And Peter is saying, you're the Lord, you're my teacher, you have claimed to be the Son of God, you don't get to crawl around on your hands and knees and wash my feet now. Because if you're the Son of God, then this is out of bounds for you. You're going to break social norms, Jesus. That's not okay. And so Peter pushes back against that. And Jesus answers him. He says, I know, Peter, I know you don't want me to debase myself, but you don't understand. You don't understand what I'm really doing here, right? You don't understand what I'm really doing here. Because if this was nothing but an act of washing feet, right? If it was nothing but the physical act of washing feet, then Jesus' answer to Peter sounds kind of rude, right? Because his answer is, if I don't wash your feet, then you've got no part with me. And the word he uses for share is an inheritance, which is Jesus is saying, if I don't wash your feet, then don't expect anything from me in eternity. Don't expect to see any sort of place in my kingdom, Peter. And that, if this was just an act of washing feet, that seems pretty rude. It would be like if, Reagan was like, Pastor Chip, I really don't want you to wash my feet. And I said, Reagan, you let me wash your feet or I'm not going to sign your check next week. Right? Ooh, man, that Chip, that's really rude. But Jesus says that not because this isn't just an act of washing feet, but it's a symbol. It's a symbol for what's coming. It is a foretaste. It is a foretaste of the hideous ignominy of the cross. It is a foretaste of this brutal thing that Jesus is going to go through that is truly hideous. The grotesque torture that he would face, completely undeserved. The shame and humiliation of being stripped and beaten and dragged through the streets. Jesus says, Peter, I know you think that this is debasing myself to do this. Just wait. Just wait. Because what the Son of Man will have to endure for your salvation is far beyond foot washing. It's far beyond foot washing. So if you're going to have a part with me, if you're going to have a future with me, then you're going to have to recognize that you need to be washed by me. And Peter's response is, all right, then wash my hands, my head, my feet, the whole thing. Wash everything about me, Lord. And Jesus says, no, just your feet. Just your feet. You don't need to have anything else washed but your feet. And I think sometimes, as I've read and as I've listened to pastors teach on this subject, sometimes I think people get this a little messed up. I think sometimes people think that there is something in foot washing that bestows God's grace. That it's as if I can wash your feet and somehow I am cleansing you of sin. And that's not it. It's symbolic. It isn't sacramental. I'm not bestowing God's grace on you by washing your feet. That's not the point. What Jesus is saying, why he's saying that if you're clean, you don't need anything washed but your feet is this. It connects to a custom in the Near East. It connects to a custom that was practiced in Israel at the time of Jesus and for long before and long after. And it was that as they had festivals, whether they be religious festivals or just wedding feasts, as they would have parties and get-togethers, you would wash yourself before you went. That is a good practice. Amen? Right? Right? If we get invited to someone's home, we don't show up dirty. How awkward is that? I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but somebody shows up at your party and they just smell really bad. Right? Like, oh yeah, I'm glad I got to come to your wedding. I was just out working with the cows. And, here, let me knock some of that off my boot, right? We'd be like, whoa, that is a big social no, go home, wash yourself. And they did. Before they went to parties, where they went to feasts, festivals, they would wash themselves. They wanted to be clean, as we all would. But when they left their homes clean, they would travel to the destination across roads made of dust, wearing sandals. And so when they got there, their feet would be dirty. And so it was a common practice that you would wash yourself at home before going to the feast. But once you arrived at the feast, your feet would need to be washed. And so there would be a servant there who would wash your feet. So what Jesus is saying here isn't, I'm going to bestow grace on you by washing your feet. He's saying this: if you want to come to my feast, if you want to come to the wedding feast of the Lamb, that isn't happening today, that isn't just happening at this Passover meal, but that happens in eternity future. If you want to have a part in that feast, then you go ahead and wash yourself here and now to get ready, but understand the only way you're getting into my feast is if I wash your feet at the door. And that's what he does for the disciples. And that's what he does on the cross. He says, no matter how you've tried to make yourself clean, no matter how you've tried to make yourself right, whether you have been a strict student of the law or not, it does not matter, because ultimately, if you're going to see eternity, if you're going to take part in the future, in the eschatological glory of Jesus, you're going to have him wash your feet. You're going to have to be cleansed by him, because nothing that we do for ourselves is going to be enough. This is his message. And then in verse 12, let me say verse 11. For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. The verse before, he says, you are clean, but not every one of you. And he knows that Judas is going to betray him. And he says, but not all of you. I sometimes wonder what it must have been like for Jesus to have washed Judas's feet. I think we've all had a glimpse of that, haven't we? Because we're from Texas, and so we're going to be polite to people, even when we know that they're out there behind our backs just saying all kinds of stuff. When we're face to face with them, we're still going to be nice to them. We're still going to smile and say, oh, well, bless your heart, right? But it isn't that. Like, we have a glimpse of it because we want to, have some social niceties even to people that despise us. That's not what Jesus did. Jesus isn't like, well, I've washed everybody else, I guess I have to wash you too. No, for Jesus, this is an act of love. This is an act of service. And even though Judas has betrayed him to death, Jesus still loves him and will love him to the end. In verse 12, when he had washed their feet and put out on his outer garments again and resumed his place, he said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If then your Lord and teacher have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you." He says, I've given you an example for you to follow. I've given you an example that you should follow. And hopefully you do. And the example here isn't just in washing feet, although I think it's a good idea. In fact, in just a little while, when we come up and we do our question and answer at the end, I'm going to encourage you to wash someone else's feet this week. But that's not the whole point. The whole point, what Jesus is doing is he's not just pointing to the action and say, take action like I have taken action, but he's pointing to the principle that undergirds the action, which is serve people. Serve one another, take care of one another, but serve this world. Serve this world. Serve those who learn along beside you. Serve those you teach. Serve people. Serve people who hate you. Serve people who would betray you. Serve people who would deny you. Serve people who will abandon you. Serve them. Do for them. This is his message. And what Jesus is doing is calling us in some ways to act outside of our essential nature. Because our essential nature is to think of ourselves. Jesus calls us to move beyond that and to think and do for others. The reason this passage or the movie Mulan made me think of this passage is that in the movie Mulan, what she is doing is she is stepping so far outside of what is the social norm. Right? It was not the social norm for women to fight in her culture, and she steps outside of that norm. She was not initially trained to be a soldier. She was trained to be a lady of the culture, but she finds new training. She, in fact, not just moves beyond her training, but she moved outside of her nature, because it is not, I believe, in human nature to prepare to kill one another. And yet she does all of those things. And she does it to serve her Father and to save her people. Jesus, in fact, when the scriptures, when Paul describes what Jesus did, he says that Jesus, though being equal with God the Father, he humbled himself. And in this episode of washing the disciples' feet, we see that. We see that even though he was every bit equal to the Father, that he humbled himself, not just by becoming a human, not just by taking on the shape of a man, not just by taking on that human nature, but by also, even as a human, humbling himself at the base level of humanity to act like a servant and a slave. He humbled himself, which was outside of the social norms. It wasn't something that he had experienced and trained for a lot, to wash feet. And it certainly wasn't in the nature, or what we would think of the nature of God, to be humbled and debased like that. But he did that. And so the message for us is clear. As I have done for you, you do for each other. So we have to step outside of those social norms. We have to step outside of some of our social norms, right? It is, in fact, last week I went to my neighbor's house and I knocked on his door. And I realized that, I haven't knocked on someone's door without calling first in a while. Like I realized like, and like I knocked on the door and I was like, man, I should have probably called first. And his wife came to the door and I was like, oh man, I'm sorry, I probably should have called first. And she's like, what? I mean, you live next door, you don't have to, I mean, but it's kind of one of those social norms we've kind of adopted, right? Maybe we need to break some of those social norms. Maybe we need to knock on some doors of people that we don't have their phone numbers. Maybe we need to find ourselves in some quiet situations where social norms say when you're at the doctor's office, you just sit there and you look at the 2-year-old magazines and you try to act like it's not super gross that every doctor's office where sick people go have magazines, right? You work at a doctor's, why? It's like here, borrow someone else's germs for a little bit. Anyway, I'm done. Right? But we're supposed to sit there and just be quiet. Why? Why can't we strike up a conversation with somebody about eternity? They're in a doctor's office. They know they're mortal. They know they ain't going to live forever. Why not talk to them about eternity? Like that's probably a great time, especially like if they're waiting on, test results or something to be like, hey, I'm not worried about my test results because I'm going to spend eternity with the Father in heaven. What about you? Why do we have to sit there and be quiet? Why, when we're having our oil changed, do we have to sit there and watch? I think I was watching Maury Povich this week while getting my oil changed. It was a new experience. He wasn't the Father, by the way. Why? Why am I going to sit here and watch junk? Why am I going to sit here and watch trash? Well, there's somebody right here. When there's somebody who is right here, who is my brother, who I've never met him, but he is a son of the same Father. My Heavenly Father created him. My Heavenly Father put the fingerprints of his holiness on his soul, just like he did mine. And here we sit with the opportunity to talk about God's grace and goodness, or just the goodness of God on display in the weather today. But instead, we're going to find out the results of a paternity test. Man, why am I, that is a pitch right down the middle of the plate. Why am I not going to swing at that one? Why not? Because there's some social norms that say I'm just supposed to sit there and be quiet and wait for them to charge me for my oil change. Maybe it's time we break some social norms. Maybe it's time we realize that maybe we don't have the training that we would like to have, but maybe the training that we have is enough. I love that in that trailer that it shows Mulan being trained to have, this sort of delicate attention to detail and balance. And then you see all of the things that she's learned in her training to be a lady of Chinese culture, all of those principles being applied to being a good soldier. Maybe it is that your training, your history of working in a refinery creates the perfect opportunity to share the gospel with someone. Maybe it is that your work history is just what is needed to talk to someone else about your Heavenly Father. And you might say, oh no, I need to be trained like a preacher. Well, okay, maybe, but I don't have one of those cards that gets me into a refinery. I don't even know what those cards are called. Is there a card? Is there a card? Okay, there is a card. I know that much. That's how much I know about it, right? So my training doesn't get me anywhere near people who need to hear about the Lord in a refinery. Yours does. Yours does. So maybe the training that you have, you look at it, you say, well, maybe it's not the training that I need, but maybe God knows best. Maybe. Maybe God knows best, and maybe God has been preparing you for just a time as this. Maybe you don't have the training. Maybe you're shackled by social norms, or maybe you look at it as your own nature. And here's the thing. I think that this gets a lot of us. Because we by nature are concerned about us and ours. It is outside of our nature to be concerned with others. It's outside of our nature to be concerned with others. And so I think sometimes we just don't even think about it. I think that's why Jesus says, wash each other's feet. Because if you and I will attune ourselves to giving attention to other people's needs, physical needs, then we'll naturally think about their spiritual needs. If we can pay attention to their physical needs, we will be concerned about their spiritual needs, and then we will act outside of our nature to act with a godly nature. We'll be concerned about others. I think there's one other point that should be made here when it comes to our nature. I think part of our nature is that we also, just as much as we would not want to get down on our knees and wash some stranger's feet during the middle of an oil change, when we wouldn't want to do that, we would be so uncomfortable if we were in this chair. I love that when they were sitting up here and I started talking about washing feet and I said, take off your shoes, you guys laughed. Do you know why you laughed? It wasn't because it was funny. It's because it was awkward. Yeah. We laugh because it's hard for our brains to process something this awkward. It's like, oh, he's really going to do that? Oh, man, what a psychopath. Right? Yeah, we laugh because it's like, I can't. And because you were imagining being here, you're like, oh, that's so uncomfortable. It makes us uncomfortable. Maybe part of how you need to step out of your nature is to realize that other people need to serve you. I don't like that much. I don't like it much. I have a hard time being served by people. It's taken me a while to be comfortable when we're at dinner on Wednesday night and somebody comes up and they're like, here, let me throw away your plate. I want to grab them by the wrist and be like, don't you dare. I'll throw away that plate. I'm going to throw away that plate and everyone else's plate here, and I'm going to throw away your plate. I'm going to follow you home tonight. I'm going to start throwing away your dishes at home. Don't try to throw away my plate. Instead, I'll just be like, oh, no, I'm not finished with that. I've already licked it clean, but I'm not finished with that. I'm going to put some more stuff on it later. Don't you serve me. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the part of our nature that we need to move past. I'm not sure where you are with that, but I know this. I know that when Jesus says, as I've shown you, as I've given you an example, follow it. As I've served you, you serve one another. Friends, I think that we can make an amazing difference in this community. I think that we can make an amazing difference in Orange, Texas, but I don't think that we can do it if we're not willing to break outside of some social norms. Because let's be clear, the social norms have led us to here. The social norms have led us to the point to where it's rude to talk to somebody about religion, right? That's what social norms tell us, but it's not. It's not rude. In fact, it's the most loving act that you can do to ask someone if they know where they're going to go when they die. That's an act of love. That's not an act of rudeness. So we've got to break out of some of these social norms. We've got to recognize that we will never feel comfortable enough with our training. That we will never feel as if we've been trained enough. But by God's grace, the training that we have, it is enough. You see, His grace empowers our work. His grace gives power to our work. Our work doesn't give power to His grace. Let me say that again. His grace gives power to our work so that by His grace, our work is effective. By His grace, our work is powerful. His grace gives power to our work, but our work doesn't make His grace powerful. His grace is powerful all on its own. It's powerful all on its own. All we have to do is open our mouths and let His grace flow through us. And so it doesn't matter about our training nearly as much as we like to think it does. What does matter is that we act outside of our nature, that we put others before ourselves, that we take an example of Jesus, who was in every way equal to God the Father. He humbled Himself, that we never think so highly of ourselves that we can't humble ourselves and serve one another. My hope and prayer today is that we will take this example to heart, that we will recognize that just as Jesus did for His disciples, in washing their feet, just as Jesus did for us on the cross, that it's going to take that level of commitment and love and self-sacrifice to be able to change this world for the kingdom of God. Let's pray together. Most gracious Father, we thank you for today. Lord, I pray that if there's any here who doesn't know you as Lord and Savior of their life, that they might come to know you today. If there's any here, Lord, that doesn't know the power of your grace, I pray that they would learn about it today. Lord, for those of us who are your followers, I pray that you would help us. Help us to step outside of our nature to serve others. Help us to be okay with being served sometimes. Help us to recognize that the training that we have may be perfect for what we need. And help us not be bound by social norms that would keep us silent. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand together. We're going to have a verse of invitation. Let's stand.